When we think of the worst year in history, what comes to mind? Maybe a plague year, a world war. Well, what if the worst year wasn't about any of that? What if it was a year the sun just went out? We're talking about 536 AD. And yeah, historians are pretty much in agreement. It was quite possibly the single worst year to be alive. And this isn't some poetic license or a spooky story. This is a direct quote from a historian, a guy named Procopius, writing from Constantinople. I mean, can you imagine? He's looking up and describing the sun, but without any brightness, like a weak moon just hanging there for a whole year. This was the first terrifying clue that something was profoundly, deeply wrong with the world. Okay, so what was actually going on here? You have to understand, this wasn't just a weird local storm or some kind of eclipse that people didn't understand. Nope. This was something happening everywhere. A global horror story playing out at the exact same time across pretty much the entire known world. People everywhere, I mean from Europe all the way to Asia, they all wrote about the same thing. This weird, mysterious fog that just wouldn't go away. It wasn't smoke, it wasn't clouds like we know them. It was more like a shroud, a veil hanging in the atmosphere that just choked out the sun's light and warmth. And it stayed there for months and months. And the scale of this, it's just staggering. You look at the records. In China, they're talking about yellow dust that just blotted out the sky. Over in Ireland, monks are writing about a failure of bread. I mean, a total crop failure. The Mediterranean, a hub of trade, sea navigation became so dangerous it basically stopped. And maybe most chillingly, up in Scandinavia, whole communities just vanished. This wasn't a local problem, this was planetary. So that's the big question, right? For literally hundreds of years, nobody could connect the dots. I mean, what single event, what one thing could have enough power to dim the sun across the entire planet, cause mass starvation on multiple continents, and make entire civilizations disappear all at the same time? Well, the answer took a long time to find. We're talking almost 1,500 years. It really took modern science acting like a detective on a massive ancient cold case to piece together clues hidden in some really unexpected places. And the case was built piece by piece over decades. First, back in the 80s, scientists drilling into the Greenland ice sheet found something incredible. A layer of volcanic sulfates, like a chemical scar, dated exactly to 536 AD. Then, another piece of the puzzle, tree rings. All around the world, from Siberia to California, trees just stopped growing that year. And then, the final smoking gun came in 2018. A Swiss glacier held the key, ice that had the precise chemical fingerprint of an Icelandic volcano. So there it was. The culprit was a volcano. But we're not talking about just any old eruption. This was a monster, a cataclysm on a scale that's honestly hard to even wrap your head around. And it triggered something terrifyingly effective, a volcanic winter. So how does a volcano turn off the sun? Here's the simplified version. A massive eruption shoots billions of tons of sulfur gas way, way up into the stratosphere, high above the clouds and the weather. Up there, that gas turns into a fine mist of tiny particles, an aerosol layer. And this layer spreads out across the entire northern hemisphere like a giant invisible blanket. This blanket acts like a planetary mirror, bouncing sunlight right back into space before it ever has a chance to reach and warm the ground. Just like that, the Earth's thermostat gets cranked way down. The result? The average summer temperature dropped by 2.5 degrees Celsius. Now, that might not sound like a huge number, right? But for anyone trying to grow food, it's an absolute apocalypse. Think about it. Summer just never came. You're getting frost in June, snow in August. An entire global society built on the simple, predictable rhythm of the seasons was suddenly thrown into a deep freeze. And a climate shock that big, well, it's just the first domino to fall. It sets off a devastating chain reaction. We've seen the cause. Now let's look at the terrifying consequences as they rip through civilization. You have to picture the world just before 536. Things were actually pretty good in a lot of places. Empires were expanding, cities were growing, trade routes were flourishing. But after 536, it's a world of total collapse. Widespread crop failures meant mass starvation. And when people are starving, the social order just breaks down. You get banditry, chaos, all the promise of the early 6th century gone. Just shattered. But here's the thing. The famine, the cold, that was just the beginning. It was just the first punch. That volcanic winter created the absolute perfect storm for an even deadlier catastrophe. Because now you have a global population that's malnourished, on the move, and incredibly weakened. They were ripe for a biological nightmare. And just 5 years after the sun went dim, it hit, the Plague of Justinian. This was the world's first ever recorded pandemic of the bubonic plague. And it didn't just appear in a vacuum. It erupted into a world perfectly prepped for it. A world where immune systems were shot from years of hunger, and society was already falling apart. Get this, at its peak, the plague was killing an estimated 10,000 people a day in Constantinople alone. Just think about that number. This wasn't a crisis anymore. For millions of people, this was the end of the world. That 1-2 punch of the volcanic winter, followed by the pandemic, it was just more than any society back then could possibly handle. So this double disaster, it did more than just kill millions of people. It fundamentally redrew the map of the world. It kicked off huge migrations and absolutely shattered the great empires of the day. And you see people on the move everywhere. But these weren't migrations for conquest. This was about sheer survival. Entire settlements in Scandinavia are just abandoned, gone. Germanic tribes start pushing deeper south and west, desperately looking for land that could still grow food. In Central Asia, the Avars begin a huge westward push into Europe. The whole world was basically put into motion by desperation. And what about the great powers of the time? They were brought to their knees. The Byzantine Emperor Justinian, he had this grand dream of reuniting the old Roman Empire. Well, that dream died. His armies were decimated by plague, his treasury was bankrupted by the famine. Over in Persia and China, other great empires fractured under the same strain. I mean, it's a simple rule of history. If a government can't feed its people or protect them, it loses its right to rule. Now, an event this traumatic, this world-changing, it doesn't just fade into the history books. No way. It gets burned into a culture's memory. It shows up in their stories, their legends, their myths. It leaves echoes that you can still hear centuries later. And here's a perfect example. Ever heard of the Norse myth of Fimbulwinter? It's the great winter that comes right before Ragnarok, the end of the world. The legends say it's 3 brutal winters in a row, with no summers in between. Sound familiar? A lot of historians now are pretty convinced this isn't just some made-up story. It's a cultural memory, a fossil of the trauma from the very real, very terrible winter of 536 AD. So why should we care about this ancient disaster? Well, the story of 536 is a really powerful, and frankly, a pretty chilling reminder. It shows us that no matter how advanced we think we are, our complex societies are all built on a very, very fragile foundation, a stable climate. You pull that one piece out, and everything else, everything, can unravel with terrifying speed. And that really leaves us with one final big question to think about. The people of 536, they had no clue. They had no idea their world was about to be turned upside down by a force of nature they couldn't even see or understand. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What are the invisible foundations we're standing on today? And which ones are more fragile than we'd like to admit?